Welcome to the Deeper 2025 podcast. We're here. We want to help you to digest, to apply the scripture that you're reading in our Deeper 2025 reading plan. And so today, the reading for January 20th is Genesis 39 and 40. And in Genesis 37, we start to see the story of one of Jacob's sons. His name was Joseph. He was the favorite son. The other brothers knew that he was the favorite son. There were 12 sons altogether. He was the favorite. And Joseph gets sold into slavery by his brothers. If you remember the story that we read just yesterday, he gets sold into slavery. He ends up in Egypt. He ends up in Potiphar's house, who was an official in Egypt. And he serves Potiphar well, and he rises to a prominent level in Potiphar's house. But in Genesis 39 and 40, we know that God has orchestrated all these events, and Joseph remains faithful, and God remains faithful to what he wants to do in and through Joseph's life. Just a couple of things that I want to point out to you when it comes to Genesis 39 and 40. The first one is that God's presence is in every season. Genesis 39:2 says that the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. This is a repeated theme all throughout Genesis 39. As you look at Genesis 39, you see verses 21, 23, God was with Joseph, and it reminds us that God's presence is there in every season. Maybe you're going through a storm, maybe you're going through a difficult time, maybe you're having the time of your life and you're going through the best season you've ever been in. Remember that God is with you. The tendency for us is to forget that God is with us when we are going through difficult times. And so the question I would have for you is, are you in a difficult season? If you're in a difficult season, just remember that God's presence is there with you. If you're a believer, if you're a follower of Jesus, God has not forsaken you. God may allow you to go through some things, like Joseph has gone through some things in this story, but God is with you. The second thing that I want us to see from Genesis 39 and 40 is that we should be faithful in small things. Joseph, of all people, has a right to be bitter, to be angry. He's been sold into slavery. Now he's been falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. And he has just a reason. If anybody had a reason to be negative, to decide that they just weren't going to do what they needed to do, it would have been Joseph. But he continues to serve people. Even in prison, he is serving people. He's interpreting dreams. He's doing that with humility. And his integrity is on display in this whole story. We should be faithful in small things. So the question I would have for you is, how are you stewarding what God has placed in your hands? How are you stewarding the season that God has you in right now? Are you bitter and angry? Are you just frustrated? Or are you looking at that season saying, man, God has something for me even in this season. His presence hasn't left me. And what he calls me to do is just to be faithful in the small things. Here's the third thing that I think we need to realize when it comes to Genesis 39 and 40. It's God's timing is perfect. God's timing is always perfect. And here's what I know about my own life. God's timing hardly ever matches up with my timing. My timing, I think, is perfect, but then I realize that God's timing is perfect. God is the one who is orchestrating all these events, and he knows what he's going to do. And as we get to the end of this story in Genesis 50, when we see the death of Joseph, we're going to see some things, and you're going to see that Joseph says, you know what, God worked all the stuff that other people meant for bad, God meant it for good. And Joseph knew at the end of the story that God has perfect timing. Are you waiting on God's promises? Are you waiting on the promises of God to be fulfilled in your life? Sometimes it's hard to be patient. Sometimes we just want things to happen right now. We want things to get better right now. God's timing is perfect. So are you waiting on God's promises? God calls us to wait on his timing. Trust that he's at work. Trust that he is orchestrating the events in your life for his glory and for your good.